from all the species that have ever lived, we have somewhere between 1 and at the most generous, like 15% fossilized, right? So that means that even in the most generous estimate, 85% of the data set is missing. So you see a mosaic that is made up of little, say, hexagonal tiles. And there's only 15% of them that are colored in, and they're spread out throughout the whole mosaic, maybe little clusters.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically what the Darwinist is doing is they're coming with their paintbrush and they're filling in the rest of the picture.
My guest is Dr. J.T. Bridges. He's a philosopher of science, and he does a phenomenal job in this clip explaining why neo-Darwinism is failing as a theory in the academy, why at the street level that's still not really known, and what type of theory is going to be required in order to replace neo-Darwinism based on the type of theory that it itself is.
Stephen Jay Gould and Alex Eldridge, in their article on punctuated equilibrium in 1972, in the abstract, Gould and Eldridge say that paleontology has been locked into an assumption of gradualism that isn't really borne out by the data. And so they developed their punctuated equilibrium where they're perfectly content with the idea that the fossil record or the paleontological record displays long periods of stasis and then short bursts of change. From my philosophical perspective, I go, okay, stop right there. Mm-hmm. What just happened? Did the scientific community unearth a new geologic layer with a bunch of different fossils and then change their mind? No. Gould and Eldridge just decided that they weren't going to be beholden to one specific assumption in the Darwinian paradigm, and so they modified it by changing out that assumption. So if you look at what we said about the assumptions that go into neo-Darwinism, gradualism, a genealogical view of the fossil record, ultimate common ancestry, natural selection acting on random mutation as the main mechanism.
You're calling all of those assumptions?
Well, the first three are assumptions, and the last one is the proposed mechanism.
Okay.
So gradualism, a genealogical view of the fossil record, and everything coming down to ultimate common ancestry. Those are the assumptions. So that, ultimate common ancestry grounds a genealogical view because if everything came from a single origin, then everything is related. Those relations can usually be picked up by either morphological or genetic similarities, right? And then that happened gradually over time because of the mechanism is natural selection acting on random mutation, right? So then we go, okay, what does it look like to give up those assumptions in favor of non-Darwinian assumptions or anti-Darwinian assumptions? Instead of gradualism, you have something like Gould and Eldridge's punctuated equilibrium, that it's perfectly reasonable to read the fossil record in I would say a more literal way, where things don't change for a long time and then you see rapid periods of change, right? Then if you have a let's skip down, because we said that ultimate common ancestry grounds the genealogical view. I want to jump down to Christian Schwab's chemical view of the origin of life. And going back to what we said earlier is that Darwin starts his origin of life, 19th century, he starts his origin of life view from a single cell, and then he starts his biological view from there. Everything branches out into this tree of life. Okay. So I was reading a book by a guy named Christian Schwab called Genomic Potential, the Genomic Potential Hypothesis. Schwab is a chemist, and he says about the origin of life, and this, I was pretty enthralled by chemistry when I was an undergrad, never pursued it, but took a real interest. And so when Schwab said this, it blew me away because I never thought about it. He said, if life was a chemical event, right? This is what Richard Dawkins and atheist biologists are going to hold to all day long, that life was a purely chemical event on naturalistic principles. Schwab says, okay, if life was a chemical event, it happened on the molar scale. That is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, because that's how chemical reactions run. You're not going to get, and since we've descended below the level of the cell into chemistry, now we have Schwab's view saying that basically this: diversity, biological diversity, is an initial condition that started at the origin of life. It's not something that biological diversity is not something that grows up in a tree. It starts out as a forest. So what's super interesting about that as a thesis is if you have a chemical origin of life, that means that genetic and morphological similarities don't necessarily give you any clue to heredity or genealogy. Which means that it destroys, or at least it undercuts, a genealogical view of paleontology. And you go, just because species A and species B look a lot alike, there is no guarantee that they're even remotely related. They could have completely independent world lines.
Now, is there any data pointing in the direction of that hypothesis, or is he just saying there's as much data for this as there is for Darwin's idea, given that no one was there at ground zero?
I think what he's saying is this, that he's looking at neo-Darwinism starting its theory at the level of the cell. And he's saying, if life starts at the level of chemistry rather than at the level of the cell, then none of the other Darwinian assumptions make any sense, or at least they all fall like dominoes, because the clue to heredity for the Darwinists is similarities. But if you can obtain similarities, at least theoretically, if you can obtain similarities on chemical grounds and not biological grounds, then they may not be clues to heredity or genealogy at all.
I see.
Now, so my proposal is that this kind of view, okay, so then you have what's called the extended evolutionary synthesis. You have people like Massimo Pigliucci and Gerd Mueller who are working on things like epigenetics and genomic plasticity, right? And they're trying sort of in two different moods. They're trying to sort of break away from orthodox Darwinian assumptions, but they're also trying to stay tethered somewhat to the modern synthesis of the 1940s, right? They're trying to extend the evolutionary thesis, but they're really doing things that are inherently anti-Darwinian. So what I say is that we already have all of the pieces in place for a non-Darwinian construct. Schwab's chemical assumption of the origin of life gives rise to a non-genealogical view of the fossil record. Two fossils may look similar and yet have different origins. And actually, Darwinists already admit this to some degree because they admit something called convergent evolution, right? So like the human eye and the eye of the great squid are extremely similar, but we know by other means that humans and squids don't have the same genealogical origins. And so they go, okay, well, look how powerful evolution is. It can converge on extremely similar organs from completely disparate lines. You go, okay, well, this model exacerbates that in a way that it annihilates genealogy. So we have a non-genealogical fossil record, and then it actually maps onto the sort of metamorphosis genomic plasticity view, actually maps onto a punctuated equilibrium model. So those assumptions, that actually is a good...
I'm sorry, Dr. Bridges, can you just unpack that last sentence, that last statement that you made about what maps on to what, and can you just unpack that a little bit for me?
Okay, yeah. So the idea of let's say genomic plasticity, that genomics looks at genomics looks at genetics of an entire organism sort of holistically. Mm-hmm. And genomic plasticity says that you can have not natural selection acting on random mutation in order to change a species and its gene expression, but you can have large chunks of the genome change into new functional expressions for the species. That maps better onto a punctuated view of the fossil record.
I see.
So what Mueller and Pigliucci are getting at, it actually maps onto a non-Darwinian paradigm better than it does this sort of orthodox or even neo-Darwinistic view of the history of life. Now, keep in mind, we're coming at this from a empirical constructivist anti-realism. That is, whatever we replace neo-Darwinism with isn't going to be literally true because we just don't have the data for that. Remember the mosaic.
Mm-hmm.
The mosaic is still largely empty.
Mm-hmm.
We're just using the same data points and painting a different picture because we're imposing different assumptions. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the subtitle is so that's the post-Darwinism of the post-Darwinian design theory. Now, when we already have a relationship like this already established in Christian apologetics. It's with the Big Bang cosmology, right? So an atheist is going to come along and say, he's going to look at Big Bang cosmology and say, yeah, that's just maybe one universe in an infinite number of universes in the multiverse, right? Somebody like a William Lane Craig is going to come along and go, no, given the anthropic principles and whatever, the better explanation for the nature of our known universe is mind. It's a mind that transcends time, space, matter, energy, right? With this new post-Darwinian model in place, the question then becomes exactly where you got there ahead of me. The question then becomes, okay, Schwab's view of the origin of life, is it best understood naturalistically or theistically?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you have Bill Dembski and Stephen Meyer especially working on the information required at the level of the origin of life. And you go, okay, so Schwab has a genomic potential paradigm, which I think wraps in punctuated equilibrium, and it wraps in some of the assumptions of the extended evolutionary synthesis. And he rests his paradigm on an assumption of naturalism,
Mm-hmm.
metaphysically. I think we can have what I call a genomic design paradigm, where we have those same elements about natural history, but resting on theism, and the justification for that is what the intelligent design guys have been doing all along. The informational analysis, the inability of chemistry to produce complex specified information,
Mm-hmm.
the eliminating chance through small probabilities. What are the odds that something like this could have come about on purely naturalist? It's just,
Yeah.
it's exactly the kind of thing that moved Anthony Flew from atheism to at least philosophical theism. He was just like, it was the probabilistic reasoning about the origin of life.
Yeah, like maybe we can mention, just to put a little bit more texture to that, like if you wouldn't, I don't know if this is maybe a tall order off the top of your head, but what's coming to mind when you're talking about the mathematical and probabilistic issues with a materialistic explanation of everything would be like the protein folds and the combinatorial problem that I've heard Stephen Meyer talk about, which when he explained that, I actually made a video about that like a year ago. And a lot of people were like, wow, I've really never understood the actual mathematical problems with saying that it is really happening in an undirected way, and how basically, he gave the analogy of like islands that are millions of miles apart from each other in the ocean. And so anyways, I just or anything else that you think. I just always love, because you have a dense vocabulary, and I always want to kind of, like, as much as we can, pause at something like the statement that you just made to give an example so that someone can kind of get a sense for what we're talking about in a bit more detail.
Yeah, well, I'll take a stab at two different issues. One of the things that Stephen Meyer shows in his Signature in the Cell is the reason that chemical necessity is not a good explanation for the kind of information we see in DNA. So DNA, we have ATGC all matching up, and the phosphate backbone of DNA. It accepts any of the nucleic acids, right? If there were a chemical necessity as to what nucleic acid could bind, it couldn't function as a code, right? Because A would be locked into a specific spot, and it would have to go there, and it wouldn't have the freedom required to create the kind of complex code that we need for DNA to function the way it is. So that's kind of the linear improbability, right? What you're getting at with the protein folds is going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, and I think this is work based on what Doug Axe has been doing, and he found that it's 1 in 10 to the 77th functional folded proteins, and that is not only is there a sort of a linear coding issue, but the topography of the shape that an enzyme or a protein takes in order to receive, in order to do its chemical function as a catalyst or whatever. That also has a level of complexity and improbability to it. So that, I mean, so when we are criticized for accepting a God of the gaps, sort of, it's not that we don't know something about nature and we're compelled to believe that God did it. It's because of the things that we're actively seeing in nature, and it's because of the increasing mathematical precision with which we know these things and their functionalities that compels us to go, this is beyond mere chemical forces. That there has to be some intelligence that engineers this, basically.
Yeah, I think that's such a great distinction. Like, just to use maybe one analogy that's really maybe not perfect and simple, but we know where these come from, right? Like we know, who, and so it's like if we send a space probe to a galaxy far, far away, and we see an iPhone sitting on the surface of that planet, or even a factory that produces them, like we are going to think that it's possible that there might be some other intelligence in the universe responsible for this, because we know that we created it. There's gonna be newspaper headlines along those lines,
right?
If we find an iPhone factory on the the dark side of the moon or whatever, we're not going to just say this is amazing how this developed naturalistically. Like we're just not going to that's not going to be the headline on the newspaper. Is all I'm saying. Right. Which for similar reasons as what you're saying with information and like specified information, functional information, and intelligence. Yep. So when Stephen Meyer helped me realize that same basically, because people say God of the gaps, you go, oh no, you're right, we're saying we don't know, therefore God did it. Oh, you've really got me. And then realizing that it is not in any way that type of reasoning, I think is helpful.
Well, and that's why I like the sort of the positive syllogism of Dembski's work. All complex specified information comes from intelligence. The information in the DNA code is complex specified information, therefore it comes from intelligence. And actually, one of the writers says that intelligent design actually uses the term intelligence generically. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say God. Mm-hmm. It just says that for all we know, this stuff has to come from an intelligent source, which is why Dawkins could admit, oh, maybe aliens seeded life here or something like that.
Right.
Because intelligent design uses the term intelligence generically.
Yeah, I was talking with Hugh Ross, who tells the story of being at a conference, a science conference, and on the 4th day or whatever of the conference, they were basically kind of going down that path of panspermia. And I think he was sitting next to Fuzz Rana. I don't know if you know him or not. And they were kind of joking with each other. They're like, I think they're starting to get warm in terms of
because Fuzz is a biochemist, so
right.
And
they were kind of joking, like they were like, I think that in an ironic kind of backdoor manner, they're actually starting to get warm in terms. But it's funny the direction that this conference. It was actually a conference on chemical chemical evolution, I think. I don't remember exactly what it was,
Okay.
but basically they were like, now there is like, they were kind of like, hear me out, and they were kind of going down the panspermia direction. And then, these two theists are like, I think that you're right, that there could be an off-planet, highly intelligent entity capable of doing all this. Like, I think we're very close to each other here.
Yeah. Hugh and Fuzz are playing warmer, colder.
Yeah, exactly.
Scientists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you guys like this kind of content, these types of conversations, I urge you to join the Wisdom Society. You're probably wondering, what is the Wisdom Society? I'm glad you asked. Check this out. And what it is a growing community of believers from around the world. We meet weekly, discuss tough questions, read scripture, pray. We have Paul Copan, Stephen Meyer, J. Warner Wallace, Hugh Ross, and other experts that you've seen on this channel in that book club. I'm trying to connect the experts with you guys in a more intimate capacity. It's currently less than $1 a day for access to everything. I've put a ton of time and resources into building this. So join today, support the channel, invest in yourself, grow in faith, connect with believers from around the world and the experts that you see on this channel. I hope this is a huge blessing to you guys. I hope it's a no-brainer to join based on the way that it's structured, and I hope to meet you there inside of the Wisdom Society.